enforced 30, 60, 90 years. And again, my technology. I can't get it to pass. Okay, that's why I don't like technology. You see? Uh, okay, okay, all right. So, all right. So those people came here. They came here to an area where there was supposed to be no slavery. They were indentured, forcibly indentured, and required to sign an actual contract. They couldn't read, they couldn't write. So in all of these contracts, there was an X. Now, if they didn't sign these contracts, they were subjected to be sold into an open slave market. And there are cases where that has happened, that did happen. Now, how did this happen? How could the highest officials in the state circumvent the provisions of not only the Old Northwest Territorial Ordinance, but even Indiana's 1816 Constitution? Well, the way that it was done is that there were local laws created in the communities, in the counties that said, if you were a slave when you came here, you're going to be a slave when you leave. And if you were born to a slave, then you were also a slave. And if you agreed to sign an indentured contract, well, heck, that was your business. You could do that if you wanted to. And that was the way that we circumvented those provisions in those contracts. Now, around the same time that this was going on, which would be the early 1800s, there was an increasing number of people moving in here, as I pointed out, and they were also coming in from the east and maybe even from the south. And these people didn't like what they saw. They saw slavery practice here that was no different than the slavery that was practiced in the deepest South. One man decided he wanted to do something about it, and you won't read about him in your history books. This man was Amory Kinney. Amory Kinney took on the Polly Strong case. Now, there is some information that you may know about the Polly Strong case, but initially that case was filed for her and her brother, who had been born to a woman who was held as a slave in Knox County. He took that case on. It went to the Knox County Circuit Court and they lost it. They took it to the Indiana Supreme Court and they won that case. So that decision said there shall not be any slavery in Indiana. The same lawyer who handled the Polly Strong and her brother case also took on the Mary Bateman Clark case. Now there's dispute over how that came to happen, but I like to think that Mary and Polly knew each other in Knox County. They're about the same age. It was a small community. So Polly probably said, Mary, you want to be free? I know how you can get free of that contract. And Amory Kinney also handled her case. Before that case was solved and lost at the Knox County Circuit Court level, I was able to find newspaper stories reporting how Amory Kinney was beaten up in Knox County for handling these cases. So you could see that things were getting pretty nasty around that time, and this would have been in 1821. It got so bad that Amory Kinney left Knox County and he moved to Terre Haute, Indiana. And so his law partner, Charles Dewey, whose name you might remember, took the case on to the Supreme Court. Now, Charles Dewey was this tough guy. He drank, he would fight in the streets, he had duels. So he didn't care. He was going to do what he thought was the thing to do, and he didn't care about the consequences. So who is this Mary Bateman Clark? Mary Bateman Clark was a teenager when she was brought to Indiana from Kentucky by a man by the name of Benjamin J. Harrison. Benjamin Harrison was a relative of William Henry Harrison. They settled in Knox County, that's Vincennes, and after being there for a 1 or 2 years, Harrison, Benjamin J. Harrison, and the J stands for Johnston, decided he wanted to sell her contract to his uncle. His uncle was a man by the name of General Washington Johnston. General was his first name. He was a contemporary of William Henry Harrison. He fought at the Battle of Tippecanoe. He was a judge. He was a territorial legislator. He was a good man, and he was a slaveholder. He bought the indenture for $350, and Mary was then contracted to work for him. A few years after that contract, Mary and Samuel Clark were married legally in a civil ceremony there in the southern part of the state, and they began to have a family as she worked for General Washington Johnston. Around the same time that she worked for Johnston and was having children and working for Johnston, her husband filed an indenture lawsuit from a man by the name of Luke Decker. So you might be familiar with that name, Decker, because Decker is the name of a city down in the southern part of the state. Decker was also a very decorated soldier and legislator and so many other things there in the southern part of the state. He was also very prominent in the Battle of Tippecanoe with William Henry Harrison. And in doing the research about Mary and her husband, I found this article. Now, you won't be able to read it from where you are, but this article confirms that Sam Clark was with William Henry Harrison at the Battle of Tippecanoe. And this was part of an obituary that was found in an 1890 paper quoting the son of Luke Decker remembering Sam Clark. I wanted to show you these images because these are the images that are the case that was filed on behalf of Mary Bateman Clark. And this is the Supreme Court case that I found in a huge binder that is stored at the Indiana State Archives in the state. So it was really something to be able to put my hands on this huge binder where these cases were all filed. And there are several cases within those binders that are kept at the Indiana State Archives here in Indianapolis. So, as I said, Mary lost her case just like Polly did at the Knox County Circuit Court level. She took her case to the Indiana Supreme Court and she won it. These two cases set the precedents for ending slavery in Indiana. However, even though there was the state Supreme Court decision in the Mary Bateman Clark case, and it was also decided by the state Supreme Court in the Polly Strong case, slavery continued in Indiana. So I want to point out how I knew that, or how I know that. If you will look at our 1830 census records, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with these census, you will notice that there is a category for slaves in Indiana's 1830 census record. Let me see if I can get this thing to work here. Yeah, there it is. You'll see right here, it says slaves. And you'll see these hash marks right here, all the way across right here. These are the slaves, these are free people. So free colored people and slaves. So you'll see the hash marks there indicating those people were still slaves in 1830. I want to just quickly tell you about a couple of other things that were happening during this period. In 1831, the state law required Black people to post a $500 bond. Now, Indiana did this because there was an increasing influx of runaway slaves and people coming into Indiana. So folks thought, oh, hold on there, this is too much, because many of them didn't have skills or else they didn't have resources. So there was some fear that this influx of people coming from slave states, coming from enslavement, would cause problems in these towns. And then 20 years later, Indiana tightened down again on the influx of Black people coming into the state. The 1851 Constitution, Indiana's, prohibited Blacks from moving into Indiana. So you can imagine the chilling effect that that had, not only on people wanting to come here, but also on those who were already here. So many of them kind of settled their own communities, and they farmed these communities all over the state. Even in this map, there's several missings. For example, right here is where Vincennes is. And there are 3 communities there that we know existed. And there are others that are not shown at this point, but will be shown because we're going to make sure they are mapped. There's the Roberts settlement there, you probably heard of, Weaver. These were all rural communities where African Americans formed their own communities. They had their own schools and churches and other kinds of accommodations that a city would have. And they lived there peacefully. Now, in my research, I have found it was not always peaceful. There were times when these communities would be attacked. So they were always needing to be vigilant and aware of their surroundings in terms of their ability to live as just humans in these communities. So we don't know what happened to Polly Strong. And I've seen her name mentioned as Mary too, because Polly was a nickname for Mary at one time. But we do know what happened to Mary Bateman Clark. I'm her great granddaughter. So we we have had a great time making sure that her legacy has been maintained. Here you'll see at the Knox County Courthouse, there's that beautiful ornate structure right here, the marker that we were able to have placed recognizing Mary Bateman Clark. A little interesting side note is that when this marker was placed, and it's been 10 years ago, it was placed, I'm going to let you see this, around the corner or in the back. So not wanting to rock that boat, because at least we had it up. That boat was rocked by others down in Knox County until that marker was moved to its present location. Also, to recognize Mary Bateman Clark is this book that I wrote, and as Ophelia pointed out, it is available here if you're interested in purchasing it. And we've done other things to make sure that this history is a part of Indiana's history. So why does preserving this history mean so much? Well, it is part of our collective history. It's part of the full story. This story includes this information that we should have all learned in our state history classes as we attended school here. It shows the contributions of African Americans, the resilience of African Americans, and it paves the way for other benefits as well, including markers and National Register designation to find out and document that history. So Indiana Landmarks is leading a national effort, actually, to uncover and document Black heritage. We started back in the 90s, and we have continued on to today with the creation of the Black Heritage Preservation Program. And as many of you know, typically preservation focused on architectural structures in communities that have historic significance. We hope to expand that work to include those sites where those structures that are important to Black heritage have been erased. And erasure is a very common threat nationwide to African American heritage. And what does that erasure come from? It comes from the construction of interstates through African American communities. It comes from the erection of institutions like IUPUI in the Indiana Avenue area, or hospitals and communities. Our program was funded through a $5 million grant from the Lilly Endowment and additional sources of funding. So what do we do with the money? We give $200,000 annually for projects that will help preserve and remember Black heritage throughout the state. And these are some of those ways that we support those projects. Our challenge to learning about stories like the Mary Bateman Clark story is having the resources and the capacity to research those stories, number one, because you can't preserve what you don't know exists. And then to document those stories and then to share that information with the public. And I want to show you a couple quick pieces, tidbits of other history as I come to a conclusion here. These are some of the sites where we have worked to save the history. This particular site is Loud Station. And as you remember, Loud Station is one of the sites of settlement of African Americans. This is how the old schoolhouse looked when we began doing work on it. And this is how it looks today here. We were able to restore that site. Now school children are able to go through that building, that museum, to see glimpses of the past that existed there at one time. This is the Georgetown area in Madison. These are a couple of the structures that remain. This was an all African American community where there were abolitionists, Black abolitionists, who on the Ohio River rescued and helped enslaved people receive freedom. And this is a church in West Baden that was the center of that community. It was part of a Black community in West Baden, and it also is being preserved. Gary, part of a subdivision there that was created by a Black builder. Right here in Indianapolis, Allen Chapel, which is just a few blocks away at 11th and Park. It was huge in the civil rights movement. It was huge even prior to then. It was an early church here in Indianapolis, an African Methodist Episcopal church. This is what we've received in requests for funding. And so far, this is what we've been able to award out of our $200,000 annual allocation for grants. To do this work, it's going to take more than me or you. It's going to take all of us to do this work. So I wanted to share with you a trailer because this was another way that we preserved the history of the Mary Bateman Clark story. That history, which again, so few of us knew anything about. So I'm going to try to start this if I can here. This is the story of Mary Bateman. It was a 20-year-old slave who was brought against his Louisiana. She was forced into the service. It's also a story of a more early purpose made out of great angles, loose plot, and again, I don't tell Mary's small purpose. And my son and big for myself, you bet you know what you could have done. And it was school near, and he had done and stuff. People went to go, oh, it's there. People. There was a side of it inside of it. It was a completely powerful, the good study that I've seen. A lot of that was not only was all of this history a part of our lives, but we have the power to bring that history to mind today. But we don't have no not a state is a that I want them to tell the way to embarrass and the whole and the whole time we get. What reason I want to go be no slave?
Something that existed some people. Very much, much after the largest. My understanding that news story is really he was a fighter for liberty. He was known for that. Not only did he live alone, but he also was used for the of all the others.
All right, thank you, everyone. So I like to, I hate being stuck behind this podium because I kind of like to get close to y'all. But because of our Zoom audience, who I'd like to also thank for being here, I have to stay connected here to this mic so that they can hear. But I think we're doing a Q&A period at this point. So, I would just like to chat and hear your feedback or hear your questions or your concerns. Yes. I can repeat what she says. Okay, yeah. Okay, the question is that from a young lady that she discovered that her grandfather, great grandfather, had founded a university, and she wants to know how to trace that information, to document that information. That is so wonderful that you have an interest in doing that. Doing genealogical research is one of my favorite things to do. It is the beginning of being able to document the heritage and the history that I've been able to document. It's through the genealogical work. And I can help guide you through that. We're going to be having some genealogical related events here at Indiana Landmarks. I would encourage you to join the Indiana African American Genealogical Group, IAAGG. And then I also would encourage you to start with yourself, write down your own information, then go to your mom and dad, and then the line that your great grandfather is on, find out information about that grandparent, which would be the son of your great grandfather or the daughter. And you just keep going back and back and back. There are services such as ancestry.com and Family Search that are huge helps. When I started doing this work, those services didn't exist. I had to go to libraries and use microfilm and magnifying glasses. So I was so glad I was doing it when I was young and could see, because I couldn't do that now. But there's those, if you would like, I could just give you more pointers on how to do that work, because that work is very important work. And I'd like to know more about your great grandfather as well. Yes.
Great work. Very big story, important story. So it's the topic very different. I learned when I said Indiana, it's pretty great. I'm not gonna say how I know that. But I'm very curious. The work that you're doing, Landmark is doing, and other how is it being incorporated in today?
Okay, the question was, how is this work about Mary Bateman Clark and other work being incorporated into the school system? For the Mary Bateman Clark story, we created a teacher's guide, and we have made that available online on our website for Mary Bateman Clark, as well as presented that information to various teacher organizations, because my goal is to get this history into the schools, because it's important history. And so we do have a teacher's guide. It is available. we charge peanuts for the book, the teacher's guide, and a full-length documentary, because what you saw was a trailer, and we have a 4-part documentary that we put in a package, making it like $45.
But one last thing, so talk about Indiana not really being free state. But that's what we always learn in Indiana free state. So very famous part story is really important. But what about just the way we talk about our history? Before you even get to very basic part story, what was really going on in Indiana? Does that change what we see?
Well, I don't know, because I'm not in the schools, from a learning position. We're going to be hearing from some young people who are in schools for April 10th conversation we're having here at Indiana Landmarks, featuring James Madison. And the title of that conversation is Why History Makes Some of Us Uncomfortable. We don't know, because we are now, great grandparents, so we don't know exactly what the schools are teaching, but we believe from conversations with teachers that the traditional Black Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass history is what is being taught. Not much different than what we learned when we were in school. Yes.
What happened to Mary Bateman Clark after?
Well, Mary Bateman Clark had 12 children, and so she was busy. She died at age 39 from contaminated water. She died in 1839 from contaminated water. Yes. No, I did not. Okay, the question is, did I know that there was a Mary Bateman Clark and that there was this history? No, I didn't. When I grew up as a Garveyite. My father was a Garveyite. And for those of you who don't know Garveyism, huh? Okay, well, true, that's right. Well, Garveyism wasn't a racist group, it was a separatist group. It was pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Don't ask white folks for stuff. Do it yourself, and stay within your own community. So we had all Black everything, all Black schools, all Black neighborhoods, sort of like the settlements were. And so I didn't get associated with people outside of my own racial group until I was into junior high school. It really, the end of junior high school. So my father would tell us some things about his growing up and some of his ancestors, but not this lawsuit. I knew their names as I did the research, but I didn't know about this suit until, I researched it and found that lawsuit. And then went through a whole process of verifying that this was who she was. So I don't know if you've ever tried to get a marker put up, but you know that the Indiana Historical Bureau will research and research again everything you research. So we felt real confident that I had the history accurate. And, it was a celebration that we were able to find this history, because no, I did not know this as I began doing my own genealogical research. I just want to know about what made my father tick, why he did that. That's where I started. And, why was he like that? And he would tell us that growing up in Southern Indiana was very painful for him. And he was biracial on top of that. So when he left Knox County, he never took us back. So I was young 20s before I went back, and that was to do the research. So yes, in the back. Yeah, okay. The question was about an oral history project that we want to put together. We are losing history every day, and it is so crucial that we are able to capture some of these stories. So the goal is to create a statewide oral history project where we can capture the stories, the oral histories that are out there waiting to be captured from our elders before it's too late. We need that information in order to build this base of facts about our history. So we are working on that. Another thing we're doing is creating Black heritage preservation groups statewide. We now have 5, and we are hoping to have these kind of groups all over the state where Black people will research their own history. Like it or not, good, bad, or indifferent, most of the Black heritage research has not been done by Black people. And that's not a bad thing, because had it not been for those who did do the work, it wouldn't be done. So we're really happy and appreciative that this is being done. But now we need to kind of pump it up a little bit, so to speak. And so we are creating these groups, and these groups are being trained by existing preservation organizations and history organizations in these various communities. And so far, so good. We've got some momentum going, and we hope that we'll have just a movement all over Indiana of preserving that history and telling these stories that have not been told. Yes.
Speaking as a long-term genealogist, I always wondered, has there been any effort to establish a lineage society in Indiana that would identify people that research their ancestry and actually create, make a person? I mean, it's one thing to be a general history and all that stuff, but it's much stronger, like we just seen here, to actually identify descendant ancestry that was here at a certain point, certain, place in time and everything like that. It's a very strong thing to do. If you, like the daughters in the revolution, for example, like there's hundreds of types of organizations, and someone is very positive thing to have someone research their own ancestry back, find that they had a relative ancestor who lived at Miles Station by, 17 or 18, whatever year then. I think that would be a good move to establish. Then you could have 3 years, you could have a ceremonial occasion during some meeting where these people could tell a bit about their actual ancestors who was here before the 1851 Constitution.
Well, that we do have, so the question was, has there been any effort to create a Black lineage society or group or organization where we're doing that research? And the short answer is no, as far as I know. There are many people who are researching their own lineage and running into and finding out information about important people, like this young lady here wants to do. There is an organization that is statewide called the Indiana African American Genealogical Group, and it's a question that I might put to the table there. But they all do their own research, and they're doing it beyond, the paper trail. They're doing DNA research as well, and linking people all over. We're one big family here in Indiana. If you're from Indiana, we're all connected some kind of way, no matter what your ethnicity is. And so that is an ideal that I would gladly take to them to do something like that as a project. Thank you. Yes. I don't know. That's the answer to that question. I'm sure there are those who may know, but I don't know. And that kind of goes hand in hand with this whole emerging issue over reparations. I know that in California, where this is being discussed vigorously, being able to connect your lineage to enslavement is a requirement of any reparation consideration. They have not started any actual reparation allocations, but they have a state commission where they're taking a look at that. And so in terms of support for reparations, I think we all need to kind of think about what that looks like and what it could mean. I think as African-American people, we started out behind the 8 ball and to a great extent have remained there from generation to generation because all of that which seeks to be against the advancement of those people or of us, including, like I mentioned to you earlier, the attacks that are documented on settlements here in Indiana by people who were trying to maintain a life and a livelihood on their own. So it's going to be interesting as this conversation develops. I know on the East Coast, there are some efforts to do things that would be related to reparation, mortgage rate, discounts, college education, that kind of stuff. So we don't know how it's going to shake out, but it is a conversation that is getting some steam. Okay, this is from our Zoom. You mentioned that your dad did not share Mary's story with you. Do you think that he knew her story? Lots of times when I was growing up, I was told, why? That's grown folks' business. Mind your own business. Yeah, my parents, they didn't do us like that. When we would have older relatives come over, as long as we didn't open our mouths, we could sit there and listen to what was being said. But yeah, I know that a lot of adults will tell the children to leave the room when there's an adult conversation. But I had ancestors who were genealogists in their era. And so most of my siblings and family members would run when they would see them coming. And so, but I enjoyed, sitting there hearing these stories. So I learned a lot of stories about my family and how they were and who they were from listening to some of the older relatives who were doing this kind of work. Early in the 60s and 70s when I was a kid. So, that's a double-edged sword when you tell your children to get out of the room when you're talking about family business. They'll need to know everything, but it's good to let them know who their family are, who they are. There are studies that show when children know who they are, they have fewer behavioral problems, they are higher achievers, they have more self-esteem, and we are living in an era when it's going to become increasingly difficult to find out who our ancestors are. And let me tell you some of the reasons why. Am I good with time? Okay, here's some of the reasons. One, I was a census manager during the 2020 census. And as you know, the census was discontinued early. It was cut off before it was completed. But even before it was cut off, we were allowed to use fictitious information in the census. We could make up information. So for example, if one of the enumerators knocked on the door, no one was there, because those enumerators are sent to the homes of people who didn't return their census form. And that's a lot of people who didn't do that. Knock on the door, no one's there. We could go to the neighbors and ask the neighbor, do you know who lives over there? And then if the neighbor said, oh, I don't know who lives over there. We don't know our neighbors much anymore nowadays. Well, it's a man and a woman. So we could write down a man and a woman. What race are they? I don't know. They might be Hispanic or something. I don't know. Okay, Hispanic. Do you know how they are? I don't know, about 35, 40. Okay, 35. And that would be considered an enumeration at that particular house. That's one of the reasons why we need to really be thinking about making sure that our own family histories are recorded. Here's another reason. One of the major sources of information for genealogical research, of course, is obituaries. Newspapers no longer publish free obituaries. They cost $250, $300, $400, $500 for an obituary. If you don't have the money, then you can forget having an obituary other than maybe a death notice blurb, Joe Blow died. That's it. That is it. Then there's some other reasons why we need to work on getting our family histories documented. Like it or not, it has become increasingly socially acceptable to have children out of wedlock. And in some families, multiple children by multiple parents are born. Now it varies from family to family how those children's names are carried forward, whether it's the stepfather or the husband or the baby daddy or whoever. You know, there is an issue there. So and I can continue to name reasons why it's so important that we capture these histories now, that we write them down, not just as oral histories, but as written histories. It doesn't take much. It can be in a notebook. It can be, you know, you can type it up on the computer. You can go into ancestry.com and create your family trees there. But the point is that it's important that it be done. Yes, sir. Okay, the question is, what is my take on doing DNA samples? Well, you know, it's interesting. I did do my DNA. And so, you know, it gives you such broad, you know, definition of who you are, you know, what your ethnicity is. So what I found out is I have a little bit of everything. You know, I told you my father was biracial. So I have some European blood. And this is for most African Americans too in this country. We are triracial. They call it Melungeon. We are white, we are Black, we're Native American. You know, we are all these things. I had 2% Native American DNA and like the majority African. There were areas of Africa, particularly West African, that were identified. And then there was Irish and Scottish. So, you know, I always say that if the Ku Klux Klan required DNA testing, half of them couldn't qualify. So, you know, you know, we are all, none of us are just one ethnicity. We are just, this is a part of the melting pot of America. So we are all multiracial, and that's what DNA tells me. Just listening to my friends and to the people I'm in organizations with, we come from a variety of ethnicities, every one of us. Yes. The who? Yeah, you said like cases where individuals won their. How they want it. Mhm. Oh yeah, there are several of those cases that we've been able to find where people did take their case to court and they did win. And that's part of the underpinning of these two cases that I just talked about. Mm. That's right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Well, as I mentioned earlier, so for our Zoom audience, the question was, how that happened, whether I found any cases where these people did go, did sue for their freedom. And the answer is yes. But they were able to do that because they created local laws. And that, how, have you heard of states' rights? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, they were able to create local laws in order to get around the constitutional provisions. Mhm. Right. Hmm. Yes, yes. You're right. That's exactly, you said it. You said it. That's true. Yeah, well, that's exactly what happened. And there are cases that show that. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Okay. I don't want to cut you off, but well, more or less, you're right. I mean, you're absolutely right. Yes, sir.
All of the case law documents that time period in history of anything that state archives. Because the Shepherd authored a program to digitize an index. All of the files, so within the state archive, we can access that.
Yes. Yeah. What was said is that retired Chief Justice Randall Shepard, sponsored a program where all of these old cases, like the Mary Bateman Clark case, have been digitized. And if you go online to the State Archives website, you can find those old cases in a digital form, and you can read them online, all of them. Yes. The State Archives, the Indiana State Archives. The Indiana State Archives is located right at 30th and Shadeland. And there, I was able to tour that a few times. They have a huge walk-in safe. And in that safe, there's all kind of stuff. But also there are cabinets with the original 1816 Constitution. I was able to see that. And it's something to see. But yeah, they have digitized a lot of those old court cases. And so now you can go online to read them. Yes. Yes. You're right. What was said for our Zoom audience is that, we're taking pictures with cell phones. We're not writing letters anymore. We're sending email, and all of that information will disappear one day, and there'll be no record of that information or those pictures or no dates on them. And so she said that she's downloading those pictures and providing them as gifts to family members as a way to preserve those images. Yes. Well, slavery was outlawed before Indiana became a state. It was outlawed when this was part of the old Northwest Territory. And then even after Indiana became a state, it was outlawed in our Constitution, but it was practiced anyway. So the what was asked is, couldn't the people have sued? Well, just let's think about that. I mean, these are people who had no money, no support, no resources. It would be pretty hard for them to go hire an attorney. They didn't know how to read or write. They were subjected to violence to keep them under control, beatings and shootings. I have run across so many articles where enslaved people were killed by their owners with no consequences for the owner. So there wasn't a lot. It took so much. You have to really think about that time for them to have been able to do something about that, particularly file a lawsuit. And this. Yeah, yeah, it's, yes. Well, I had pointed out that 1831, there were people were still enslaved, let alone indentured. I don't know the answer to that question because, it's ongoing research. But we do know that in 1830, there were slaves in Indiana. So you'd have to think that there were slaves in Indiana in 1830. There were probably also indentured servants as well. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, I'm not understanding when you say ranking. Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, there are records that will show who all the children are. Those are census records. And the census is done every 10 years. There is no 1890 census, which is really critical for a lot of folks because it was destroyed in a fire. So you've got census records recording African Americans in Indiana, actually starting in the 1820s and 1820, 1830 census. I have found African Americans listed in Indiana by name in 1820. Now in the South, like Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, those places, the Carolinas, you won't find those people listed individually like that, like you will here in Indiana. In Indiana, people were listed in that census individually and by family groups. So you just trace those family groups from census to census. Mhm. Yeah, I can say it. Oh, yeah, I can say it. Yeah, yeah, I can say that. So I am the daughter, I told you, of a Garveyite. That was my dad. His name was Charles Brewer. His mother and father, of course, his father's name was Charles. His father's name was George. His father's name was Jesse, who was from Alabama. That's where my Brewer line comes from. His Jesse's wife, my two-time great-grandmother, her name was also Mary, and her mother was Mary Bateman Clark. So, okay, okay. Well, I just want to thank you all for being here. I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you. Did you have a question? Okay, okay. Just thank you so very much. I appreciate you. I hope I was able to share something with you. So I have the books on sale. They're $14.99. I've got 10 of them. And it tells Mary's story in real detail, and it talks about life for Black folks in Indiana in general. So thank you anyway.
Before you go, I just have a few more words. Before you go. We're not through yet. This is how we get kids quiet. Shh. All right, I bought Eunice's book and I couldn't put it down. It's a really good story. I would encourage you to get a copy of it. And I want you, again, to thank Eunice for this information. I appreciate your questions. I hope you got some information you can take with you, and be sure to come back for our other series. Our next one will be on Thursday, April the 27th. Educator Cleet Ladd will talk with us about Indiana African Americans in the military, including the U.S. Colored Troop, Tuskegee Airmen, and the Women's Army Corps. Don't forget to complete your evaluations. Be encouraged to make a contribution, a tax-deductible contribution. I know many of you are getting ready, or you've just completed your taxes, but think about that. Think about Freetown Village. And I thanks for all of our sponsors. Thank you for coming, and thank you for sticking through.